After the storm, the Outer Banks looked quiet again. But behind the broken fence of an abandoned kennel, something was still waiting. A former Navy SEAL named Dorian Steele found a starving German shepherd chained beneath a liquidation sign. She did not bark, did not beg. She only stood guard over an empty cage. Dorian thought he was rescuing one forgotten dog, but Juniper's chip, her fear of metal crates, and one dead man's signature would lead him into a trail of stolen truth. Stay with this story and tell us where you're watching from. Your likes and subscriptions help SEAL K9 Tales reach 5,000 subscribers and keep more stories like this alive. The morning after the tropical storm, the sea looked innocent. That was the thing Dorian Steele disliked most about water. It could tear half the coast loose in the dark, scatter men's roofs like playing cards, shove boats against pilings until wood screamed, and then, by dawn, lie silver and quiet beneath the gulls as if it had merely rolled over in its sleep. Dorian stood on the deck of Mercy's Wake, his old fishing boat, and watched the harbor breathe through the damage. The small dock behind him leaned a little more than it had yesterday. A bait freezer had tipped near the fuel shed. Crab pots lay twisted in the parking lot, smelling of brine and rust. Strips of torn tarp clung to the chain-link fence like blue skin. Somewhere down the row, a loose halyard slapped a mast with the steady irritation of a clock that had survived the end of the world, and now wanted everyone to know it. Dorian tightened the rope at the stern and wrote the time in his notebook. September 14th, 07:10. South line held, stern line frayed, tide higher than posted. The notebook was waterproof, navy blue, and swollen at the edges from years of salt air. It lived in the left chest pocket of his olive-drab combat shirt, the one with camouflage sleeves and dark horizontal bands around the upper arms. Most men used their phones for reminders. Dorian used paper. Paper could burn, soak, tear, or vanish in a house fire, sure. But it did not pretend to be eternal while quietly losing your life inside a server no one admitted had failed. 3 years earlier, his Veterans Benefit file had come back with the wrong service dates. Then the wrong medical code. Then the wrong address. Then no address at all. One office said the correction had been uploaded. Another said there was no record of the correction. A third said the case had been closed because he had failed to respond to a letter he had never received. Somewhere in that maze of polite voices and hold music, Dorian Steele had stopped believing in invisible records. So he wrote things down: names, times, weather, receipt numbers, phone extensions, wind direction, the smell of diesel if it seemed important, the mood of the woman behind the counter if it seemed suspicious. The tide, always the tide, because here on the Outer Banks, the sea was the oldest clerk in the county, and it remembered more than people did. He was 49 years old, broad-shouldered, tall, still hard through the chest and arms in the way old military discipline stayed under the skin. His face had been carved by sun, sleeplessness, and restraint. There was a handsome ruin to it, something weathered but not broken. His dark brown hair, a little too long by old regulations, moved in the damp wind. The stubble along his jaw showed threads of silver. On his right forearm, partly hidden when his sleeve fell, a faded Navy SEAL tattoo sat like an oath the years had tried to sand away. He checked the forward cleat, the pump switch, the storage locker, the tarped stack of spare rope. Then he stepped off Mercy's Wake and onto the dock. The harbor smelled like salt, motor oil, wet pine, and old fish. The scent was not pleasant exactly, but it was honest. Dorian respected honest smells. They did not arrive wearing a tie and tell you the system was experiencing a temporary processing delay. He walked past the bait shed, past Harlan Voss's locked net stall, and onto the narrow road that curved along the marsh. He needed to check a secondary anchor line he had tied to an old piling beyond the dock before the storm hit. Most men would have called it unnecessary. Most men had not spent years learning that the unnecessary thing was usually the one that saved you. The marsh beside the road lay flattened, grass combed in one direction by the storm's invisible hand. Brown water shimmered in the ditches. Egrets picked through the wreckage with the solemn arrogance of priests inspecting a battlefield. A road sign bent toward the mud as if bowing. Half a mile out, beyond a stand of storm-stripped wax myrtle, Dorian saw the old sign for Sandbar Kennels. The board hung crooked between two posts, its paint blistered, the letters nearly gone. Sandbar Kennels. Below that, nailed across the gate in newer black letters, another sign read, "Property for liquidation. No trespassing." Dorian stopped. He knew the place by reputation. Everyone around the small harbor did. Years ago, Sandbar Kennels had bred working dogs, family dogs, anything that could be advertised with bright eyes and a clean blanket. Then complaints came. Noise, sanitation, too many animals, too many trucks at odd hours. Eventually, the breeding license was pulled, and the property entered that gray swamp of county notices, unpaid bills, and liquidation. Officially, nothing lived there anymore except mildew, mosquitoes, and old paperwork. But the storm had changed the face of the property. A section of wooden fencing along the side yard had snapped loose. One sheet of gray tarp had been torn upward and twisted over the wire like a flag of surrender. Through that opening, Dorian could see a part of the kennel yard that had never been visible from the road before. At first, he saw only sand, wet sand, scattered boards, a toppled feed bin, a row of rusted cages. Then the shape near the post moved. Dorian's hand went still at his side. A dog stood beneath the liquidation sign, chained to a wooden stake driven into the soaked ground. Not stood exactly, held itself upright. She was a German shepherd, or close enough that the old noble lines were still visible beneath hunger. Maybe some Belgian Malinois in the narrow waist, the quick angle of the legs, the sharp intelligence in the head. Her coat should have been gold and black, but the gold was dulled by salt and dirt, and the black saddle across her back had clumped into ragged strips. Her ribs showed. Her hips showed. Her neck wore the memory of a chain even where the current one did not touch. One ear stood high. The other had a small tear along the edge. She did not bark. That troubled him more than barking would have. The dog watched him with pale amber eyes, steady and exhausted, like a lighthouse lamp nearly out of oil. Behind her sat an empty kennel, its door hanging open. She stood in front of it anyway, trembling, as if guarding a kingdom of nothing. Dorian took one slow step off the road. The chain scraped. The dog lowered her head, but she did not retreat. There was nowhere to retreat to. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded strange in the damp morning. He used it rarely before coffee, and almost never on living things. He crouched several yards from the broken fence. The sand darkened his boots. He did not whistle. He did not click his tongue. He did not do any of the foolish bright noises people used when they wanted an animal to forget it had reasons to be afraid. He took out his phone. For a moment, his thumb hovered over the screen. He hated relying on it. Still, a record was a record, and cameras did not care what a man believed. He photographed the broken fence, the tarp, the sign, the chain, the stake, the dog. Then he took out his notebook and wrote the location, the time, and the condition of the animal in short, controlled lines. The dog's eyes followed the pen. That was the moment that caught him. Not the ribs, not the chain, not even the way she shook in the wind. It was the way she watched the pen, as if she had learned that human hands decided whether a creature belonged to mercy or inventory. As if somewhere in her life, a clipboard had been more dangerous than a storm. Dorian closed the notebook. Something inside him, something he had kept wrapped tight for 3 years, shifted like a rope under strain. He called County Animal Control. The line clicked twice, then routed him through an emergency storm response system. A tired woman answered after the third transfer. Her voice had the grainy patience of someone who had been awake since midnight. Dare County Animal Services, Storm Response Line. "This is Dorian Steele," he said. "I'm outside Sandbar Kennels, off the Marsh Road near the old ferry spur. There's a dog chained in the side yard. Severe neglect. Fence is storm damaged. Animal is exposed." A pause, typing. "Sir, are you currently on the property?" "Outside the broken fence." "Is the animal aggressive?" Dorian looked at the dog. She was still standing between him and the empty kennel, skinny legs braced, the chain hanging from her collar like a judgment. "No," he said. "Scared? Weak?" "We have multiple active storm calls and road access problems. If there's no immediate public danger, keep your distance. I'll enter the report." "She may not make it until someone gets here." Another pause. Shorter this time, less official. "I understand. I need to advise you not to trespass. If you can safely provide photos to the report link, do that. If the animal is in immediate distress and you take action, document everything and get veterinary care as soon as possible." Dorian almost laughed. Document everything. For once, the world had spoken his language. "Send the link," he said. He ended the call, took 3 more photos, and waited. The dog swayed. Not much. Just a small failure in the front legs, a dip and recovery so brief another man might have missed it. But Dorian had spent years reading bodies under stress. The teammate who said he was fine while leaning too hard against a wall, the fisherman who joked through chest pain, the old man at the dock who walked slower when bad news sat in his pocket. The dog was losing the argument with her own body. Dorian looked at the sign again. Property for liquidation. There were phrases men invented so they did not have to say cruelty out loud. He stepped through the broken section of fence. The dog stiffened, her ears angled forward. A low sound gathered in her chest, but it did not become a growl. It was more warning than threat, more prayer than warning. "I know," Dorian murmured. "I wouldn't trust me either." He shrugged off his old field jacket and held it low in one hand, not reaching yet. With the other, he showed his palm. The mud sucked at his boots as he approached. The smell worsened inside the yard. Wet rust, old waste, moldy straw, and something sour beneath it. A row of metal transport crates sat stacked under a half-collapsed awning. At the sight of them, the dog's breath changed. Faster, shallower. Dorian noticed and stopped. "All right," he said. "Not that way." He shifted his angle, approaching from the side instead of between her and the crates. It took time. The kind of time that made cold rain creep under his collar and down his back. The kind of time most people wasted because they were too eager to be kind. When he finally reached the stake, he knelt. The dog's nose moved once toward his sleeve. She smelled salt, diesel, old cotton, and perhaps the loneliness of another creature who lived half on land and half in retreat. The chain was looped through an iron ring and clipped to a collar too tight against her neck. Dorian worked slowly. His fingers were large, stiff from old injuries and morning cold. The clasp resisted. He breathed out through his nose and tried again. Behind him, a voice cracked across the yard. "You better take your hands off that animal." Dorian did not turn immediately. He freed the clip first. Only then did he look back. A man stood near the trailer behind the main kennel building. Heavy-set, red-faced, gray-blonde hair plastered down by rain, work jacket dark with damp. He wore a faded cap that still showed the ghost of the Sandbar Kennels logo. A ring of keys hung at his belt, large enough to sound like a jailer in an old myth. Warden Pruitt. Dorian knew him by sight, as most men around small harbors knew one another. Not as friends, not even as neighbors, but as recurring weather. "That dog is part of a liquidation inventory," Pruitt shouted. "You're trespassing." "She's in distress? She's property?" Dorian looked at the dog. The dog looked at him. Something almost like humor moved through him, dark and brief. The world was fond of calling living things by dead names: case file, claimant, unit, inventory. "I called it in," Dorian said. "Photos taken." "She's going to a vet." Pruitt came closer, boots slapping through the wet sand. "You walk out with that dog, I'll have you charged." "Then spell my name right on the complaint." Pruitt stopped a few yards away. His eyes moved from Dorian's broad shoulders to the tattoo half visible on his right forearm, then to the phone in Dorian's pocket, then to the dog. The dog leaned against Dorian's leg. Barely. A touch so light it might have been weakness rather than trust. But Dorian felt it all the same, a small weight, a question placed against his knee. He laid the field jacket over her back. She flinched at first, then froze. The jacket swallowed her thin body in faded olive cloth. It made her look smaller. It made Dorian angrier than he wanted to be. But anger was an expensive fuel. He had learned that long ago. It burned hot and left a man stranded. He lifted the dog carefully. She was lighter than she should have been. For one foolish second, the old part of him expected resistance, snapping, panic, teeth. Instead, she went rigid in his arms, her head turned toward the empty kennel she had been guarding. Dorian followed her gaze. There was nothing inside but damp straw and a dented metal bowl. Nothing worth guarding, unless emptiness was all she had left. Pruitt pointed a thick finger. "You're making a mistake, Steele." That stopped him. Dorian had not given the man his name. He turned his head slightly. Pruitt's face tightened, as if he realized what he had revealed and hated the world for having ears. "Small town," Pruitt muttered. Dorian held the dog closer. "Then you'll know where to send the paperwork." He walked out through the broken fence and did not look back. The road to the harbor seemed longer with the dog in his arms. Rain fell in thin silver lines. The marsh grass hissed. Twice Dorian had to stop and adjust his grip because the dog's bones pressed sharply beneath the jacket. She did not lick him, did not soften, did not offer any sentimental sign that the rescue had turned the key in her heart. Good, he thought. Trust should have standards. By the time he reached Mercy's wake, the harbor had begun its slow resurrection. Men hammered loose boards. Someone cursed at an engine. A gull stole something from an open cooler and escaped like a minor criminal blessed by the gods. Dorian carried the dog across the dock and onto the boat. Inside the cabin, he laid an old blanket near the forward berth, away from the engine noise and away from the narrow metal ladder. He set down a bowl of water. The dog stared at it, then at him, then at the doorway, measuring exits. "You can drink," he said. She did, but only after he turned slightly away. He found a strip of soft cloth and made a loose temporary lid, careful not to touch the raw-looking fur around her neck more than necessary. Up close, the little tear in her left ear was clearer. So were the amber eyes. Not yellow like sickness, yellow like dune grass under late sun, like something that belonged to this coast more honestly than most men did. "You need a name," he said. The dog blinked. Dorian looked through the cabin window toward the marsh road, the storm-torn scrub, the plants that survived where soil was mostly sand and salt. Juniper grew in places like that. Tough, stubborn, thorned against the wind. Not pretty in the easy way. Useful. Living. Hard to kill. "Juniper," he said. The dog did not wag her tail, but her ears moved. Dorian accepted that as a vote, not against. Evening came bruised and orange through the torn clouds. The harbor quieted by degrees. Generators hummed. Dock lights flickered. Rainwater dripped from ropes into the black-green water below. Juniper lay near the bow, wrapped partly in his old jacket, eyes half open. She had not slept fully. Every creak of the boat pulled her back. Every metallic sound made her breath catch. Once, when a loose chain outside clinked against a piling, she lifted her head so fast that Dorian felt the motion in his own chest. "No chains here," he said from the table. She watched him. He opened his notebook beneath the small yellow lamp. The cabin around him was cramped, maps curled at the edges, a mug with a cracked handle, a radio patched with tape, a shelf of spare parts labeled in his block handwriting. It was not much of a home, more like a bunker that floated. But tonight, for the first time in years, it held 2 heartbeats. Dorian wrote slowly. September 14th. Found female German Shepherd mix chained behind Sandbar Kennels after storm. Property marked for liquidation, fence damaged, animal exposed, severe thinness, neck injury from restraint, called county report line, photos taken, removed for emergency care. Vet tomorrow morning. He paused. The pen hovered. Outside, the sea rocked the boat with the gentleness of a giant pretending it had never been cruel. Juniper's eyes remained on him from the bow, cautious, bright, unwilling to surrender the night. Dorian turned the page slightly and added one more line in smaller letters. She does not trust me yet. He looked at the dog, at the torn ear, the thin body, the stubborn light still burning in her gaze. Then he wrote, "Fair enough." By morning, Juniper had not learned sleep. She had learned the boat. That was different. She knew the cabin door made a soft wooden complaint when the wind pressed against it. She knew the little radio above the shelf clicked before it hissed. She knew the rope outside the hull tapped 3 times, stopped, then tapped again when the water shifted under Mercy's wake. She had not accepted these sounds as safe, not exactly, but she had stopped flinching at all of them. Dorian counted that as progress. He woke before sunrise in the narrow berth, one arm folded beneath his head, boots still on the floor where he had left them. For 1 second, he forgot there was another living thing on the boat. Then he heard a small breath near the bow, thin but steady, and the memory returned with the weight of a hand on his chest. Juniper lay on the old blanket, partly wrapped in his field jacket. Her pale amber eyes were open. "You win," he murmured. "I slept more than you did." Her torn left ear shifted, but her tail stayed still. Dorian sat up slowly. No sudden movements, no bright kindness. He had known men who treated fear like a locked door and tried to kick it open with cheerfulness. It never worked. Fear opened only when it decided the room outside was not another trap. He filled a small bowl with water and set it near her. Then he broke a piece of plain boiled fish into flakes. Juniper watched his hand with the severe focus of a customs officer judging contraband. "You can inspect it," he said. She waited until he looked away before eating. Outside, the harbor was dragging itself back into working order. Hammers started before the gulls had finished arguing over the bait bins. A generator coughed near the fuel shed. Somewhere, a man shouted that nobody had borrowed his extension cord, which meant, in harbor language, that everyone knew exactly who had borrowed it. Dorian washed his face in cold water, changed into a clean olive-drab combat shirt with camouflage sleeves, and checked the notebook he had left open on the table. The last line still looked at him from the page. Fair enough. He touched the edge of the paper with his thumb, then wrote beneath it, Vet. First available. Bring photos. Bring report number if county sends one. His phone had received the animal control report link sometime after midnight. He had uploaded the photos, though the signal had sputtered like an old man in bad weather. The confirmation number sat on the screen, small and sterile. Dorian copied it into the notebook anyway. At 8:10, he coaxed Juniper off the boat. Coaxed was perhaps too graceful a word. It involved 10 minutes, 3 fish flakes, 2 false starts, and one moment when Juniper planted all 4 paws on the dock and looked at the shore with such ancient suspicion that Dorian nearly apologized on behalf of the continent. Fair, he said again. Land has not made a good first impression. He did not use a proper collar. The fur around her neck was too raw, the old chain mark too angry beneath the coat. Instead, he looped a soft length of cloth around her chest in a temporary harness and held the lead loose. Juniper moved stiffly at first, then found a rhythm beside him. Not trusting, not relaxed, but moving. Dr. Marin Hollis's clinic sat behind a tackle shop with a sun-faded sign showing a smiling marlin that looked too cheerful to be believed. The shop's front windows were taped in an X from the storm. Behind it, down a narrow side path, a smaller door bore the words, Hollis Coastal Veterinary Care. Inside, the floorboards creaked under Dorian's boots. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, damp fur, burned coffee, and the faint medicinal sweetness of animal shampoo. It was not a large place. 2 exam rooms, a reception counter, a shelf of donated towels, a bulletin board full of missing pets, vaccination reminders, and one hand-drawn sign that read, "Please do not let your ferret free-range the waiting room again." That almost made Dorian smile. Almost. A woman in green scrubs came from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. Dr. Marin Hollis was in her early 50s, sturdy rather than tall, with ash-blonde hair tied low and loose at the nape of her neck. Reading glasses hung from a thin cord against her chest. Her face had the kind of lines earned by looking closely at pain, without becoming theatrical about it. She looked at Juniper first. Not with pity. Pity often arrived with too much noise. Marin's gaze moved from the dog's hips to the neck, to the torn ear, to the way Juniper positioned herself half behind Dorian's leg and half in front of it, unable to decide whether the man was shelter or liability. Then Marin looked at Dorian. "You Steele?" He nodded. "I got the message from the county line. You brought photos?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Exam room 2. Slow is fine." That was all. No lecture, no suspicion sharpened for its own sake, no grand speech about doing the right thing. Marin simply held the door open and stepped aside, allowing Juniper to choose the threshold rather than be pulled through it. Juniper entered with her nose low, reading the room in invisible script. Dorian placed his phone and notebook on the counter. Marin reviewed the photos without comment, but her mouth tightened at the image of the chain and the wooden stake. "This was last night?" "Morning after the storm," Dorian said. "I found her around 8, called animal control before removing her." Marin nodded once. "Good. That matters." The words landed more heavily than Dorian expected. That matters. So much of his life had been swallowed by things that apparently did not. Forms sent on time, calls logged, corrections filed, pain described in the approved boxes. Years of doing what mattered, only to be told the system could not find the proof. Marin did not know she had given him a small stone to stand on. She was already kneeling beside Juniper. "Hello, girl," she said softly. "No one here is in a hurry." Juniper's ears angled back. Marin did not reach over her head. She offered the back of her fingers low and away, then waited. Juniper sniffed once, withdrew, then sniffed again. "Smart," Marin murmured. "Suspicious, but smart." "Can't blame her." "No," Marin said. "We usually shouldn't." The examination took time. Weight, temperature, gum color, hydration, eyes, teeth, paws, neck. Dorian stood where Juniper could see him, one hand resting near the exam table, but not on her body, unless she leaned close enough to invite it. Marin's voice stayed even as she worked, but the facts gathered in the room like storm clouds that had found a second sky. "She's underweight, not just missed meals underweight." Marin parted the fur gently near the collar line. "This restraint mark has been there a while. See the pattern? Old pressure, new irritation." Dorian looked. He did not need the details. He saw enough. "There are signs she's had litters," Marin continued, careful with each word. "More than once. Hard to say how many without more testing, but this isn't a dog who got loose after the storm and had a rough week." Juniper turned her head toward Dorian. Her eyes were not pleading. That might have been easier. They were simply present, as if she had brought her whole unspeakable history into the room and laid it at his feet without asking what he planned to do with it. Dorian's hand hovered near her muzzle. He did not touch. Instead, he lowered it to the table, palm open. Juniper rested her chin a fraction closer. Marin saw it and pretended not to, which made Dorian like her more. "I'll document everything," she said. "Photographs, body condition score, neck injury, dehydration. I'll send a copy to Animal Control if you authorize." "I authorize." "And to you." "Yes?" "Paper or email?" Dorian answered too quickly. "Paper." Marin's eyes flicked to the notebook on the counter. No judgment, just recognition. "Paper, then. I'll print too." A young assistant passed in the hallway, pushing a metal transport crate on small wheels. The sound was not loud. It should not have changed the air. A thin metallic rattle, wheel over floor seam, a hollow clink of latch against frame. Juniper collapsed downward so fast Dorian's body moved before thought caught up. Her paws scraped against the wooden table, then the floor as she tried to get beneath it. Not attacking, not even fleeing with direction, just trying to become smaller than the sound. Her breathing broke into sharp pieces. The assistant froze. "Oh, sorry, Dr. Hollis." "Take it back," Marin said quietly, not angry. "Immediate. Now." The crate rolled away, its sound fading down the corridor. But Juniper did not come back from wherever it had taken her. She pressed herself against the floorboards, claws spread, eyes wide and empty of the room. Her ribs moved too fast beneath her coat. She was here, and not here, aboard some old terror that had returned on metal wheels. Dorian crouched several feet away. Every part of him wanted to reach. Every trained part of him knew reaching was not always rescue. He lowered both hands to the floor, palms down, made himself smaller, made his voice the calmest thing in the room. "No one is putting you in there," he said. "No one." Juniper's eyes flicked toward him. The clinic seemed to hold its breath. Marin stepped back without being asked. The assistant did not speak. Even the coffee machine behind the wall chose, by some mercy, not to cough. Dorian stayed where he was. "I know," he said, barely above a whisper. "You heard it before you saw it." That's how bad things announce themselves sometimes. Juniper's claws flexed. "When I got out," he continued, not sure whether he spoke to the dog or to some locked room inside himself, "I couldn't stand certain hold music. Stupid, right? Not thunder, not engines. Hold music. Same loop, over and over, right before somebody told me my file wasn't where it should be." Marin did not look at him, which allowed him to keep speaking. "Funny thing, what the body remembers." Juniper shifted forward by 1 inch, then another. Her belly stayed low. Her breath still came wrong, but she moved toward his hand, not away from it. When her muzzle finally touched his knuckles, Dorian felt the contact like a fragile verdict. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps a question. He did not close his hand over her. He let her decide how much of him she wanted. Juniper placed her chin on the back of his hand. For a moment, Dorian forgot the clinic, the storm, the county, Pruitt, the old chain mark, and every office that had ever told him to wait 30 to 60 business days. He felt only the impossible weight of a frightened animal choosing him as the least dangerous thing in the room. It embarrassed him how much that meant. He cleared his throat. "She's got standards." Marin's mouth softened. "Good. Standards keep creatures alive." The rest of the exam moved slowly. Juniper did not climb onto the table again. Marin worked on the floor when she could, checking what she needed with patient hands and no wasted sympathy. She gave fluids, a careful feeding plan, and medication instructions. No sudden rich food, small portions, quiet environment. Return visit in 48 hours unless symptoms worsened. Then came the microchip scanner. Marin passed the device over Juniper's shoulders. It beeped near the left side of the neck. Dorian watched Juniper tense, but the scanner made no sound, like metal crates, no wheels, no hollow latch. Just one small electronic chirp. Marin read the number aloud and typed it into her clinic computer. The machine hummed. The screen painted her face in bluish light. Dorian disliked how quiet he became around screens. He could feel the old suspicion rise in him, scaled and patient. Screens always looked clean. That was their talent. They could hide rot under smooth glass. Marin frowned. "What?" he asked. "Chip's old. Registration comes up, but not cleanly." "Meaning?" "Meaning there's a primary organization listed, but the ownership record is locked from public view. Initial registration points to Harbor Valor Companions." Dorian did not know the name. Marin did. He saw it in the brief stillness of her face. "They're a non-profit," she said. "Local, worked with veteran companion animal placements. At least that was the public version." "Public version?" "I volunteered on a few cases years ago. Some good dogs came through, some good people too. Then I stopped hearing from them." Marin tapped the keyboard again. "This record shows a name change, more than one transfer date. Sandbar Kennels appears here as a temporary care provider." "Sandbar had a revoked breeding license." "Yes?" Marin's tone sharpened by half a degree. "Which makes temporary care an interesting phrase." The printer behind her coughed to life. Juniper lifted her head at the noise. Dorian touched 2 fingers to the floor beside her, not on her. She looked at his hand and settled again. Marin noticed. "You're good with her," she said. "I'm not good with much." "That wasn't what I said." The paper slid from the printer. Marin took it, read once more, then placed it on the counter beside his notebook. "This chip does not prove anything by itself," she said. "It gives us a door, maybe a locked one, but a door?" Dorian stared at the name. Harbor Valor Companions. A bright name, a polished name, the sort of name donors liked, the sort of name that could sit on a brochure beside a flag, a smiling veteran, and a dog with clean fur. Juniper pressed closer to his boot. The door to the clinic opened then, letting in damp air and the smell of the tackle shop next door. A woman stepped inside, carrying a leather satchel and a travel mug. She moved like someone who had learned that hesitation was expensive. Dark bobbed hair, navy raincoat, sharp brown eyes that took in Dorian, Juniper, Marin, the printed record, and the notebook in less time than most people needed to say hello. "Nadia Klein," Marin said. "Good timing." Nadia's gaze paused on Juniper under the edge of the exam table. Juniper withdrew a few inches. Nadia did not bend, squeal, or offer her hand. She simply opened her satchel, removed a small sealed bag of soft dog treats, placed it on the floor several feet away, and then looked at Marin as if she had done nothing at all. Dorian watched that. It was a small act, almost invisible, but it told him she understood dignity, at least in animals. "Mr. Steele?" Nadia asked. "Dorian." "Good. I'm Nadia. Marin said you might need help with an emergency animal custody issue and possibly a veteran benefits overlap." "I didn't ask for a lawyer." "No," Nadia said. "Most people don't ask for the thing they need until the other side has already hired one." Marin made a sound that might have been a laugh disguised as a cough. Dorian did not smile, but something in his shoulders changed. Nadia took the printed chip record and scanned it. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the locked ownership field. "Harbor Valor," she said. That name again. "You know them?" Dorian asked. "I know enough not to answer that casually." She looked at his notebook. "You document?" "Everything." "Good. Then you and I may get along." "I doubt that." "Even better," Nadia said. "Optimism makes people sloppy." This time, Dorian did almost smile. They sat in the small consultation room, while Juniper remained near his chair, one paw touching the edge of his boot. Nadia did not ask him to recount every wound of his military life. She asked for dates, where he found the dog, who he called, what Pruitt said, whether he had photos, whether anyone witnessed the removal, whether the dog received immediate veterinary assessment, precise questions, clean lines, no pity wearing perfume. Dorian answered. When he hesitated, he checked the notebook. Nadia watched the pages with a kind of professional hunger. "You write weather conditions, too?" she asked. "Tide, road condition, wind if it matters." "It often matters later," she said. That sentence did something strange to him. For years, people had treated his notes like symptoms. Nadia looked at them like tools. His phone buzzed before he could answer. Unknown number. Local. Dorian let it ring twice, then picked up. "This is Steele." "Mr.?" "Steele, this is Officer Lee Carver with Dare County Animal Services." Her voice was brisk, tired, and outdoors even through the phone. He pictured someone standing near a truck with rain on the brim of a cap. "I'm following up on your report from yesterday morning regarding the dog at Sandbar Kennels," she said. "I received your photo upload. Dr. Hollis also sent notice that the animal is being evaluated." "She is." "I need the exact location where you found her, copies of the veterinary record when available, and any communication you had with the property caretaker." "I wrote it down." A pause, then, not unkindly. "Good. Send it. If the emergency condition is confirmed, removal from immediate danger can be reviewed as protective action. I can't promise outcome, but documentation helps." Dorian turned his eyes toward Nadia. Nadia pointed at his notebook, then made a small circle in the air with one finger, as if to say, "Keep the wheel turning." For the first time in a long while, a procedure did not feel entirely like a wall. It felt, perhaps, like a narrow gate, still locked, still official, still capable of closing in his face. But a gate was different from a wall. A gate implied hinges. "I'll send it," Dorian said. After the call ended, Nadia began drafting a records request related to Juniper's chip number and Harbor Valor companions. Marin printed the medical summary. Dorian signed authorizations in block letters, pressing hard enough that the pen nearly carved the paper. Juniper eventually stretched her neck toward the unopened treat bag Nadia had placed on the floor. Nadia looked away at once, pretending deep interest in a filing cabinet. Juniper took one treat, then retreated. "A ruthless negotiator," Nadia said. Dorian looked down at the dog. "You have no idea." By late afternoon, the harbor light had turned pale and clean, the way it did after storms when the world looked rinsed but not repaired. Dorian carried a paper folder under one arm and walked Juniper back toward Mercy's wake. She moved slower now, tired from the exam and the fright, but she no longer tried to pull away from every doorway. On the boat, he set up her blanket near the bow again. Fresh water, small food, medication instructions taped above the little table because he did not trust memory any more than he trusted servers. Juniper circled the blanket 3 times before lying down. Dorian sat at the table and opened a new notebook. The first page waited, clean and pale. He wrote, "Juniper," then beneath it, "Female German Shepherd mix, found at Sandbar Kennels, Harbor Valor companions listed on chip record. Emergency vet exam completed. Animal control follow-up, Officer Lee Carver. Legal contact, Nadia Klein." He paused, listening to Juniper breathe. The notebook was not evidence yet, not exactly. It was something more tender and more dangerous. A promise in ink. Dorian looked at Juniper, at the torn ear, the raw place around her neck, the eyes that closed for 1 second before opening again to make sure the world had not changed shape. "At least this time," he said softly, "someone writes your name down right." Juniper lowered her head onto her paws. Outside, the harbor ropes creaked, the tide lifted the boat, and the sea, ancient and unreliable, carried them both into the evening. Harbor Valor Companions did not look like a place where anything bad could happen. That, Nadia Klein told Dorian, was exactly why places like it deserved a second look. The building sat 2 streets back from the tourist strip, where souvenir shops sold lighthouse magnets, seashell bracelets, and shirts that promised visitors they had survived storms they had only watched from hotel balconies. It had white siding so clean it seemed newly scrubbed for an inspection. Blue shutters framed the windows. A neat flag moved above the entrance. Near the door, a wooden sign showed a painted hand resting over a paw print. Harbor Valor Companions, healing those who served, one companion at a time. Dorian stood on the sidewalk with Juniper beside him and felt his jaw tighten. The phrase had weight, not because it was ugly, but because it was too pretty. It had the soft roundness of words chosen by committee. Healing, served, companion. Each one polished until it reflected whatever the donor wanted to see. Nadia arrived beside him, carrying her leather satchel and a travel mug that looked permanently attached to her hand. "You hate it already," she said. "I haven't gone inside." "You hate it efficiently." Dorian looked down at Juniper. The dog wore the soft navy collar Dr. Marin Hollis had fitted loosely around her neck, away from the irritated skin. Her coat still looked rough, gold dulled by salt and old neglect, but after 2 days of careful food and quiet rest aboard Mercy's wake, she no longer seemed as if the wind might carry her away. She stood close to Dorian's left leg, nose moving, ears shifting at every passing car. "I hate slogans," he said. "Good, then let me talk." That was always the plan. Nadia's mouth tilted. "I was hoping you understood." Inside, Harbor Valor smelled of fresh paint, lemon cleaner, and expensive coffee. The lobby walls displayed framed photographs of veterans kneeling beside dogs with clean coats and red bandanas. Some men smiled too wide. Some women held their dogs like anchors. Each photo had a small brass plaque beneath it with a first name and a phrase: "New beginnings. Faithful friend. Second chance." Dorian tried not to look too long. It was not that the photos were false. That would have been easier. Some of those smiles might have been real. Some of those dogs might have saved lives in quiet rooms where no medals were handed out. That was what bothered him. Good things could be used as curtains. A bright flag could hang over a locked door. Juniper pressed closer to his boot. A receptionist with pearl earrings and a careful smile looked up from behind the desk. Her eyes flicked first to Nadia's satchel, then to Dorian's weathered face, then to Juniper's uneven body. A small hesitation crossed her expression before the smile returned. "May I help you?" "Nadia Klein," Nadia said. "We have a records inquiry regarding a companion animal registered through this organization." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I spoke with your office this morning. Mr. Sutter said he could give us 10 minutes if we came before noon." The receptionist's smile became thinner but stayed alive. "One moment." Dorian glanced at a framed poster near the hallway. A clean German shepherd sat beside a man in a pressed shirt. The caption read, "No veteran walks alone." Something inside him gave a dry little laugh. He had walked alone through 3 years of missing files, and nobody had thought to print a poster about that. A door opened at the far end of the room. Graham Sutter stepped out as if entering a room were a skill he had practiced. He was in his early 50s, trim with neatly combed sandy brown hair and a navy blazer that belonged in a fundraising luncheon, not a county still drying out after a storm. A silver watch flashed at his wrist. His smile arrived before the rest of him, warm in shape, but cool in the eyes. "Ms. Klein," he said, extending a hand. "Graham Sutter, thank you for coming by. And Mr. Steele, I presume." Dorian did not offer his hand immediately. Graham waited with professional grace, as if pauses were simply another form of furniture. Finally, Dorian shook. Graham's palm was dry and soft. "And this must be the dog in question," Graham said, looking down. Poor girl, the storm displaced so many animals. Juniper did not move toward him. "She was chained," Dorian said. Graham's face arranged itself into concern. "Yes, I heard there was confusion at the Sandbar property. A tragic location, really. We used them years ago for temporary care in certain cases, before their licensing issues became public. Records from that period can be messy." Nadia's eyes sharpened. "Messy is one word," she said. Graham gestured toward a small conference room. "Let's sit." The room was bright and square, with a round table, a pitcher of water, and more photographs on the walls. In one, Graham stood beside a row of veterans holding leashes. In another, he accepted a local award beneath a banner that read, "Community Restoration Through Compassion." Dorian stayed near the door. Juniper lowered herself beneath his chair, but did not settle. Her ears kept moving. Nadia took out a printed copy of the microchip record Marin had provided. "This chip number lists Harbor Valor Companions as the initial registering organization," she said. The animal now known as Juniper was found at Sandbar Kennels under conditions that required emergency veterinary care. Her ownership record is locked. Her transfer history shows inconsistencies. Graham listened with the expression of a man hearing unfortunate weather news. "I wish I could answer everything immediately," he said. "But older records were migrated when we changed database providers. Sometimes legacy chips remain attached to outdated entries." "Her name was changed," Nadia said, "common in placement work." "Transfer dates don't match the estimated condition timeline." "Again, old systems." Graham spread his hands. "And with animals, timelines are often approximate." Dorian looked at him. There were men who lied like thieves, eyes darting, hands busy. Graham lied like a harpist. Smooth, practiced, each note placed where it made the room softer. "And Sandbar Kennels?" Nadia asked. "A former subcontracted temporary care provider," Graham said. "We discontinued that relationship when concerns arose." "Do you have the termination date?" "I can have someone look." "Please do." Graham gave a small nod, as if granting a favor. "Of course, but I should be clear. Harbor Valor has helped many veterans and animals. A single confused chip record should not be treated as evidence of wrongdoing." Dorian's gaze drifted to the wall behind Graham. A photograph showed a veteran smiling with a black and tan dog in a red bandana. The man's smile looked tired but real. Dorian wondered whether that man had received the dog promised to him, or whether his face had become part of a wall meant to quiet questions. Under the table, Juniper suddenly went still, not tense in the ordinary way, completely still. Dorian felt it through the leash before he saw it. A young staff member had entered quietly to set a folder near Graham's elbow. A ring of keys hung from her belt. Attached to the ring was a short loop of nylon strap, bright blue-green, the kind used to tag crates or bind equipment. It swung once as she stepped back. Juniper's body tightened against Dorian's boot. Her head dropped. Her breathing thinned. Dorian followed her gaze to the strap. The room continued speaking around them. Graham said something about database migration. Nadia asked about retention policies. The staff member smiled apologetically and backed toward the door. Juniper did not blink. Dorian stood. Nadia stopped mid-sentence. Graham looked up. "Is something wrong?" "She needs air." "We're almost finished." Dorian's voice remained quiet. "No, we're finished for now." He did not wait for permission. Outside, the sunlight hit hard after the white lobby. Dorian led Juniper across the parking lot to a low live oak whose branches leaned toward the road, like an old woman listening to gossip. Beneath it, the ground was sandy and scattered with leaves hardened by salt wind. Juniper stood for several seconds, then lowered herself to the ground. Dorian sat beside her, his back against the tree. Cars passed on the tourist road. Somewhere beyond the shops, beyond the rentals with their cheerful signs and storm-bent deck chairs, the ocean breathed. It sounded tired. Dorian did not touch Juniper at first. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Juniper shifted until her shoulder rested against his shin. It was not dramatic, no sudden surrender. No magic cure beneath a tree, just the smallest correction in distance. Inside the building, people had spoken of healing beneath framed photographs and fresh paint. Outside, under a crooked oak, a frightened dog decided the man beside her was less dangerous than the memory of a blue-green strap. That was the kind of ceremony Dorian understood. Nadia came out 10 minutes later, the wind lifting the ends of her dark bob. She carried 3 photocopied pages and a face that told Dorian she had not enjoyed the rest of the conversation. "He gave us nothing useful on purpose," she said, "so something useful exists." "That is one of your more optimistic interpretations." "Wasn't optimism. Pattern recognition." Nadia looked at Juniper beneath the tree. Her expression softened for less than a second, then returned to work. Harbor Valor paid Sandbar under several categories: temporary care, behavioral rehabilitation, storm displacement, veteran companion transition. "Sounds like 4 names for 1 bucket." "It may be 4 buckets for 1 drain," Nadia said. "I need more records." "Can you get 'em?" "Some, not all. Public filings, grant summaries, vendor payment disclosures if county or federal funds touch them. The private records will be harder." Dorian watched a gull land on a trash can across the street with the confidence of a corrupt mayor. "Nadia?" "Yes?" "That strap on the employee's keys." "I saw." Juniper knew it. "I saw that too." He looked down at the dog. "She wasn't guessing." "No," Nadia said, "but fear is not evidence." Dorian gave a humorless smile. "There it is." "I'm not dismissing it," she said. "I'm protecting it. If we turn her fear into a claim before we can support it, people like Graham will call it emotional speculation and bury everything else under it." He wanted to dislike that answer. Instead, he wrote it down. "Fear is not evidence. Protect it until it can lead to evidence." Nadia watched the pen move. "You always do that?" "Do what?" "Write down things that annoy you, especially those." "Healthy?" "No." "Useful, then." That evening, Useful came wearing a wool cap and smelling of rope tar. Harlan Voss found Dorian at the dock while Juniper rested on the deck of Mercy's wake, her head on her paws, eyes following every gull like each one owed her money. Harlan was 67, lean as a piling, with a white stubble beard and hands cracked by decades of salt water and net cord. His blue knit cap had lost its shape years ago, but apparently not its authority. He carried a coil of repaired line over one shoulder and a face full of things he had decided not to say until they became too heavy. "You the one took that dog from Sandbar?" Harlan asked. Dorian looked up from rinsing a bowl. "That depends who's asking." "Old man who should have asked questions sooner." That answer earned him a longer look. Harlan stepped closer to the boat, but not onto it. He nodded once at Juniper. She lifted her head, sniffed, then lowered it again. No panic, rope and fish and old tobacco maybe, but not the wrong thing. "I used to haul feed there," Harlan said. "Couple years back, after the license trouble, Pruitt said they were just boarding overflow animals from storms. Rescue work, he called it. I didn't know better." Dorian said nothing. Silence had a way of making men fill it with the truth or leave. Harlan rubbed his thumb along the coil of rope. "Trucks came late sometimes. Box trucks, no company name. They'd use the back gate, not the road entrance. Yellow running lights only. I heard crates inside. Metal ones?" Juniper's ears lifted. Dorian noticed. Harlan noticed too, and regret moved across the old man's face like a cloud. "I didn't see much," Harlan said. "Didn't want to. That's the honest shame of it. Pruitt told me if I kept talking around the harbor, he'd come after me for interfering with contracts. Said I'd lose what little work I had." "Did you keep receipts?" Harlan snorted. "You always ask romantic questions?" "No. I got some delivery slips, fuel notes, maybe dates. My wife used to say I saved paper like a raccoon saves shiny things." "Used to?" Harlan looked toward the water. "Gone 6 years." The harbor sounds moved gently around the gap her absence left. Dorian stepped onto the dock. "Would you be willing to talk to Nadia Klein?" "Lawyer woman?" "Yes." "She mean?" "Efficient." "Worse," Harlan said. Dorian almost smiled. Harlan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, soft at the creases. This was from a delivery, found it in an old glove box. Sandbar stamp, dates on there. Might be nothing. Dorian took it carefully. "Nothing usually doesn't hide this long," he said. Harlan looked at Juniper again. "That dog was there before?" "I think so." "Thought I heard one like her once." His voice dropped. "Didn't bark, just hit the crate door when the truck moved, like she hated the box more than the men." Dorian felt his hand close around the delivery slip. Juniper stood, not quickly, not with alarm. She rose, walked to the edge of the boat, and looked at Harlan. The old man lowered his eyes, as if ashamed to be recognized by a creature he had failed without meeting. "I'm sorry," Harlan said to her. Juniper only watched. Sometimes forgiveness was too heavy to ask from the ones who had survived. Later that night, Nadia called from her office. Dorian put her on speaker while he sat at the table, notebook open, Harlan's delivery slip flattened beneath a mug. "I found enough for a preliminary report," she said. "You sound unhappy about that." "I sound cautious. There's a difference." "There is?" Harbor Valor's public filings show small grant disbursements broken across multiple service categories. Some payments went to Sandbar Kennels after the public record says their breeding license was revoked. They labeled them as care support, transportation, rehabilitation. Harlan says trucks came through the back gate at night. "Good, not good morally, useful legally." Juniper lay under the table, breathing more evenly than she had the day before. The boat rocked in the dark, its old hull answering the tide. "I'm sending a preliminary summary to Special Agent Corinne Vale," Nadia said. "Federal side, grant misuse, animal transport irregularities. She's careful. Don't expect fireworks." "I don't like fireworks." "You'll like her then." A few minutes later, Nadia called back with Corinne's response. Dorian listened as Nadia read it aloud. The indicators were concerning. The available material did not yet support an emergency inspection request. A timeline was needed. Documented mismatches were needed. Proof of intentional alteration or misrepresentation would strengthen the matter significantly. Dorian leaned back in the chair and laughed once. Dry, short, almost not a laugh at all. "Of course," he said, "the gods of paperwork demand a cleaner sacrifice." Nadia ignored the joke because she had the mercy not to reward it. "They need something that survives scrutiny." "They always do." "Yes," she said, "and this time you may be the annoying man who has it." Under the table, Juniper shifted until her side touched his boot. A living anchor. Dorian looked down at her. The dog did not know about grant categories or locked ownership fields. She knew the sound of crates, the smell of certain straps, the weight of chains, the difference between a hand that grabbed and a hand that waited. Perhaps that was not evidence, but it was truth of another kind. And Dorian was beginning to understand that this fight would need both. The next morning, Nadia came to Mercy's wake with a folder thick enough to make the small table look suddenly inadequate. She had not slept much. Her coffee had the grim smell of survival. Marin had sent over the finalized veterinary record. Harlan had agreed to speak if asked directly, and not in a room full of men in suits. Officer Lee Carver had confirmed receipt of Dorian's report and the clinic documentation. "Before you ask," Nadia said, dropping into the chair opposite him. "No, we do not have enough yet." "I wasn't going to ask. You were going to stare until I told you." "Different method, same result." She slid one page across the table. "This is from an older placement summary tied to the chip prefix range. It took some digging. Juniper's chip number appears in a batch registered through Harbor Valor." Dorian read the page. The letters were small. The boat moved slightly beneath him. For a moment, the words blurred, not from emotion, but from the old habit of expecting paper to betray him. Then one line became clear. Assigned companion animal transferred to veteran recipient. Alvin Mercer. Date of transfer, March 3rd. Dorian looked up. "Who is Alvin Mercer?" Nadia did not answer at once. That was how he knew. She placed another page beside the first, an obituary printed from a local archive. Alvin Mercer, Marine veteran, age 71, had died the previous September, 6 months before he supposedly signed for Juniper. Dorian stared at the signature box on the placement record. There it was. A name, a date, a clean line of ink pretending a dead man had reached across half a year and claimed a living dog. The cabin seemed to shrink around the paper. Juniper lifted her head from beneath the table. Dorian did not touch the page again. Not yet. It felt like touching a gravestone someone had used as a receipt. Nadia's voice was low. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For the fact that I'm about to ask you to help prove what is obvious." He looked at the two papers. Outside, the harbor moved on. Boats knocked gently against docks, men cursed at ropes, gulls screamed as if the world owed them breakfast and legal standing. Dorian thought of Alvin Mercer, whoever he had been, a man who had worn a uniform once, a man whose name had outlived him just long enough for someone to steal it. He thought of Juniper under the table, alive, wary, registered to a ghost. Then he said the words slowly, because they deserved to be written in the air before they went into the notebook. "Dead men don't sign papers." Nadia nodded. Dorian picked up his pen. "But living people can have the truth stolen from them." Juniper placed her chin on his boot. Dorian wrote Alvin Mercer's name beneath Juniper's, not as a clue. As a witness? By the fourth morning, Juniper had discovered that gulls were thieves. She had not yet decided whether they were enemies. One landed on the dock rail beside Mercy's wake with a scrap of something pale in its beak, stared at Juniper with the shameless confidence of a pirate king, and hopped sideways as if daring her to object. Juniper lifted her head from the blanket near the bow. Her torn left ear stood at a crooked angle. Her amber eyes narrowed. Dorian, sitting at the cabin table, with coffee gone cold beside his notebook, watched the whole negotiation. "Don't start a war you can't finish," he said. Juniper did not look at him. The gull shrieked. Juniper gave one low huff, not quite a bark, more like a legal objection filed under protest. The gull flew off with its stolen prize. Dorian wrote in the margin of his notebook, "Dog suspicious of gulls." Good judgment. It was the first useless thing he had written in days, and that made it precious. Then a white van rolled into the harbor lot. It had no company logo on the side, no rust either, which made it stand out among the dented trucks, bait coolers, salt-stained trailers, and work vans that belonged to men who had long ago stopped expecting machines to look clean. The van parked near the head of the dock. Its headlights stayed on for 2 seconds too long before going dark. Dorian closed the notebook. Juniper stood. The man who stepped out wore a dark rain jacket so clean it seemed personally offended by the harbor. His boots were black, polished, and somehow free of mud despite the wet gravel. He carried a clipboard inside a plastic cover and moved with the flat confidence of a person who believed documents were weapons because he had used them that way before. He walked down the dock without asking whose boards they were. "Dorian Steele?" he called. Dorian stepped out of the cabin and onto the deck. "Depends." The man stopped at the edge of the dock beside the boat. He was in his early 40s, head shaved close, face narrow, mouth set in a professional line that never promised warmth. His eyes moved from Dorian to Juniper, then back to the clipboard. "My name is Tobin Reese. I represent Recovery Chain Services on behalf of Harbor Valor Companions and Associated Property Custodians." That must be hard to fit on a business card. Tobin did not blink. "I'm here regarding unauthorized possession of an animal identified in temporary care records as HVC4719. Juniper's body changed at the sound of letters and numbers spoken like a name. Dorian felt it before he saw it. The leash was loose, but the air between them tightened. Juniper stepped down from the bow and came to his side. She did not rush. She did not snarl. She simply placed herself between Dorian and the man with the clipboard. Tobin looked at the dog as though her silence were inconvenient. "Her name is Juniper," Dorian said. "Names assigned by unauthorized holders do not alter ownership status." Dorian almost laughed. Almost. There were men who could turn a living creature into a line item without changing tone. Tobin Reese was one of them. The world had made a whole profession of men like that. Clean boots, laminated documents, and souls wrapped in fine print. Tobin held up the clipboard. "This is a temporary care agreement showing the animal was under supervised placement through Harbor Valor Companions, with Sandbar Kennels as contracted custodian during transition. You removed the animal from liquidation property without authorization. Animal was in distress. Disputed. Documented." Tobin's eyes flicked once. "You may submit documentation through proper channels. Until then, Harbor Valor Companions requests immediate return of the animal pending review. She isn't going anywhere with you. That is not advisable." Dorian stepped onto the dock. He was taller than Tobin by several inches, broader through the shoulders, still wearing the olive combat shirt with camouflage sleeves under an open gray rain shell. The faded tattoo on his right forearm showed when the sleeve shifted. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. For half a second, the old part of him wanted to solve the problem as if it stood across from him in a dark doorway, overseas. Close distance, remove threat, end conversation. But Juniper was watching him. So was the harbor. And Nadia had warned him the night before. "They will not always come as villains," she had said over the phone. "Sometimes they arrive with forms. That is when you breathe before speaking." Dorian breathed. Then he took out his phone and called Nadia. She answered on the second ring. "If this is about a new gull-related emergency, I bill extra. Tobin Reese is standing on my dock with a recovery order." The humor vanished from her voice. "Put me on speaker." Dorian did. "Nadia Klein," she said, crisp as a snapped line. "Mr. Reese, please state who authorized your visit and whether you are attempting physical recovery of an animal currently under veterinary documentation and county review." Tobin adjusted the clipboard. "I am providing notice of unauthorized possession and requesting voluntary return." "Good. Then you may send the complete original agreement, chain of custody, authorization letter, and any supporting documents to my office. You will not remove the dog today." "This animal remains the property of—" "That claim is contested," Nadia cut in. "We have emergency veterinary records, photographs from the scene, a county animal services report number, and confirmation that Mr. Steele called the matter in before transport. Any attempt to remove the animal without proper review will be documented as interference with an active welfare inquiry." The dock went quiet except for the water knocking against pilings. Tobin's jaw tightened a fraction. Juniper lowered her head. She still did not bark. Her quiet was worse than anger. It was the silence of a gate held shut. Tobin looked at her, and for the first time, his professional mask cracked just enough to show irritation. "You people are making this more complicated than necessary," he said. Dorian spoke before Nadia could. "You people usually means somebody's about to lie." On the phone, Nadia exhaled. "Dorian." He looked down at Juniper and stepped back half a pace. Tobin slid a copy of the alleged temporary care agreement from the plastic cover and held it out. Dorian did not take it. "Leave it on the dock." Tobin placed the paper on a dry patch of board, weighted it with a small binder clip, and straightened. "You'll be hearing from counsel." "Wonderful," Nadia said through the speaker. "I adore paper." Tobin turned and walked back toward the lot. His boots still somehow avoided every puddle, which Dorian considered suspicious in itself. Only after the white van pulled away did Juniper move. She pressed her shoulder against Dorian's shin and released a breath that sounded too old for a dog of 5 years. Dorian crouched beside her. "You did good?" Juniper looked toward the road where the van had disappeared. "No," he said softly. "Nobody's taking you back by paperwork either." Nadia stayed on the line. "Pick up the document by the corner. Don't smear anything. Photograph it first." "You think it's fake?" "I think it wants to be believed too badly." That afternoon, Nadia took Dorian to the Dare County Records office. Juniper did not come inside. Marin Hollis had offered to watch her for a few hours, and Officer Lee Carver agreed to meet them outside the county building to review the latest paperwork. Lee arrived in a county animal services truck, hair tucked under a worn cap, eyes tired but alert. She took one look at Tobin's copy and said, "That's moving fast for people who claim this is just confusion." Marin stood beside her, cardigan buttoned wrong in one place, which somehow made her look more trustworthy. Juniper stayed near Marin's knee, but watched Dorian through the truck window until he entered the building. The records office smelled like wet paper, old carpet, and air conditioning that had given up years ago, but continued from habit. It sat in the lower wing of the county building, where ceiling tiles sagged slightly, and the walls held framed notices about public access rights, fee schedules, and hurricane preparedness. Dorian disliked it instantly. Rooms full of records felt to him like graveyards where promises were buried upright in metal drawers. Nadia walked as if she owned the place until someone proved otherwise. At the counter sat a woman with short silver hair, a cardigan the color of rain clouds, and glasses perched low enough on her nose to make every visitor feel 12 years old and guilty. A nameplate read, "Evelyn Rusk, Records Archivist." She looked at Nadia's satchel, Dorian's boots, and the rainwater on the floor behind them. "No wet cardboard enters this room," she said. Nadia paused. "Good afternoon to you, too." "It may be afternoon. Good remains under review." Dorian liked her immediately and feared her a little. Nadia introduced herself and explained the request. Records connected to Sandbar Kennels, Harbor Valor Companions, temporary animal care agreements, storm-related animal support, and any public funding contracts tied to county or federal pass-through programs. Evelyn listened without moving much. Her face did not soften. It sharpened. "People arrive here believing records leap off shelves when summoned by moral urgency," she said. "They do not. They are filed by code, date, department, retention class, and occasionally by whoever last misunderstood the alphabet. We have reason to believe a dog was assigned through a placement record to a veteran who had already passed away," Nadia said. Evelyn's fingers stopped near her keyboard. Dorian noticed. Nadia slid a copy of the placement summary across the counter, then the obituary. "We also have a disputed temporary care agreement being used to recover the dog from the man who removed her from distress after the storm." Evelyn read. Her expression did not change in any obvious way, but the room seemed to feel a small drop in temperature, as though somewhere in the kingdom of paper an old queen had been insulted. "Dead men," Evelyn said, "are frequently poor signatories." Dorian looked at Nadia. Nadia looked back as if to say, "Yes, I know, I like her too." Evelyn stood. She was smaller than Dorian expected, but her posture had the authority of a lighthouse. Some Sandbar Kennels material should have been digitized after the licensing review. Some may still be boxed because storm animal support contracts and public funding records have different retention requirements. Audits complicate disposal. "Where are the boxes?" Nadia asked. "In a supplemental storage room." "Can we access them?" Evelyn gave her a look over the top of her glasses. "You may request access. I may determine whether that request is specific enough not to waste my remaining years." Dorian cleared his throat. "What do you need?" Evelyn turned to him. "Dates, names, contract labels, payment categories, anything more useful than outrage." Dorian opened his notebook. For the first time that day, the room made sense. He read out dates from Juniper's chip record, from Harlan's old delivery slip, from Tobin's paper, from the veterinary report, from his own call to animal services. Nadia added program names. Evelyn wrote box codes on a yellow pad in handwriting so neat it looked printed by a machine with standards. Outside, Juniper sat beside Marin and Lee, near the truck. The county building's front steps were still damp from morning rain. People came and went carrying envelopes, umbrellas, old frustrations. Juniper watched them all with caution, but she no longer trembled at every passing footstep. An older man in a faded Marine Corps cap paused near the ramp. He had come alone, leaning on a cane, a folder tucked under one arm. His face was deeply lined, not weak, just worn down by the patient erosion of offices. He looked at Juniper and stopped as if a hand had touched his shoulder. "She yours?" he asked Marin. Marin glanced at Lee. "She's with a friend." The old man nodded, but his eyes stayed on Juniper. "Had one. Not like her. Brown mutt, ugly as a kitchen mop. Best dog I ever knew." Juniper rose. Lee shifted, ready to shorten the lead, but Marin shook her head slightly. Juniper stepped toward the old man, slow and deliberate. She did not jump, did not ask for touch. She simply sat beside his cane, close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his pant leg. The man swallowed. "Mine got transferred on paper," he said. "That's what they told me. Transferred, like he was a package. By the time I found out where, nobody could find the file. Nobody could find the dog." Marin's face changed, the way a shoreline changes when the tide pulls back and shows the rocks. "What was his name?" Lee asked gently. "Biscuit," the man said, then gave a cracked little laugh. "Terrible name. He earned it?" Juniper leaned barely against his leg. The old man placed one trembling hand on the top of his cane and did not touch her. Maybe he understood standards too. Through the lobby window, Dorian saw them. He had stepped away from Evelyn's counter to take a call from Nadia's office, and for a moment he simply stood behind the glass, watching Juniper sit with a stranger whose grief had recognized her before his words did. Something opened in Dorian then, wider than anger. Until that moment, Juniper had been a dog he rescued, then a mystery, then evidence the world was trying to misfile. Now she became a mirror, not just of him. Of all the quiet damage done when kindness passed through bad hands and came out stamped, reassigned, unavailable. A man could lose a dog to a transfer line. A dog could lose her name to a locked field. A veteran could lose 3 years to a wrong code. The wound was not one story. It was a shoreline, eroded in many places, each collapse blamed on weather. Dorian returned to the records counter with a different face. Nadia noticed. "What happened?" "Nothing," he said. She waited. He corrected himself. Another man had a dog disappear through paperwork. Evelyn looked up from her box codes. For once, she said nothing sharp. By late afternoon, Evelyn had found the first real thread, a storage index entry for Sandbar Kennels tied to public animal care disbursements and subcontractor agreements. The box itself was not in the main archive. It was in the supplemental storage room near the low rear wing, along with several unsorted containers from the last licensing review. Evelyn tapped the code with her pencil. SBK AC 17 through 23, she said. Possibly related, possibly full of mold and disappointment. The supplemental room took water last season, and after this latest storm, facilities flagged it again. If another surge comes through before those boxes are moved, retrieval becomes unpleasant. Unpleasant as in inconvenient? Nadia asked. Unpleasant as in expensive, slow, and likely incomplete. Dorian wrote down the codes. At the same moment, Nadia's phone buzzed. She read the message. Her face went still. What? Dorian asked. Tobin Reese has filed a civil recovery request, emergency review. They're claiming Juniper is under temporary custodial contract and that you're interfering with lawful placement. Evelyn made a small sound of disgust. Everyone adores urgency when they manufacture it themselves. Nadia put the phone away. We need those boxes. Evelyn looked toward the narrow hall that led deeper into records, then at the rain darkening the window. I will submit an internal pull request, she said. How long? If I do it the ordinary way, too long. And the extraordinary way? Evelyn adjusted her glasses. The extraordinary way requires people not to touch what they are not told to touch, not to breathe mildew into my face, and not to confuse panic with usefulness. Dorian nodded once. Understood. Evelyn studied him. You look like a man who has confused worse things. Yes, ma'am. Good, then you may be trainable. They left as evening rain began again, fine and steady, turning the parking lot lights into blurred halos. Marin handed Juniper's lead back to Dorian. The dog greeted him not with joy exactly, but with relief restrained by dignity. Her shoulder brushed his knee. The older veteran with the cane was gone. But Dorian still felt the shape of him there. Back at Mercy's wake, the harbor had gone gray and quiet. Dorian carried the folder inside, hung his wet jacket, and set his notebook on the small table. He turned to secure the cabin door. When he looked back, Juniper had taken the notebook gently in her mouth. Not chewing, not playing. She lifted it from the table, stepped down carefully, and placed it at his feet. Then she sat beside it, torn ear-angled, eyes solemn as a small guardian posted before a sacred chest. Dorian stared. For the first time all day, the laugh that came out of him was real, though rough from disuse. All right, he said, crouching to retrieve it. You're the second lawyer. Juniper blinked. But you bill in dried fish, correct? Her tail gave one small, undecided thump against the floor. Outside, the rain tapped on the roof of the boat. Inside, the notebook rested between them like a map, like a shield, like the first brick in a bridge neither of them had known they were building. The second storm did not arrive like a beast. It arrived like an accountant. No thunder rolling over the sea like cannon fire. No black wall swallowing the horizon. No dramatic roar to announce judgment. Just a long gray pressure in the sky, a persistent wind out of the northeast, and rain that began as a whisper against the windows of Mercy's wake before becoming a steady hand pressing the world lower. Dorian distrusted quiet storms more than loud ones. Loud storms spent themselves bragging. Quiet storms worked in ledgers. They added 1 inch of water to a parking lot, then another. They loosened one screw, then another. They entered places not by breaking the door, but by finding the seam beneath it. By evening the harbor had grown tense. Men tied extra lines. Coolers were dragged higher. Dock planks darkened under rain. The road beyond the bait shop shone like black glass. Juniper stood at the cabin door with her ears moving, tracking every slap of rope and every groan of wood. Dorian wrote the weather in his notebook. Wind, rain steady, tide running higher than forecast. County storage risk if surge rises. He paused after that last line. County storage risk. The words looked like a small bad omen on the page. Nadia had called twice that afternoon. Evelyn Rusk was pushing for access to the supplemental records room, but the county building had already moved into storm procedure. Non-essential pulls were delayed. Facilities was sandbagging the rear wing. The boxes connected to Sandbar Kennels were still there, still not retrieved, still waiting in a low room that did not care how urgent truth had become. "Paper is patient," Evelyn had said over the phone. Then, after a dry pause, she had added, "Water is not." Dorian had not laughed. Now he sat at the table, listening to rain on the cabin roof. Juniper lay beside his boots, chin on her paws, eyes half open. The navy collar Marin had given her looked too new against the roughness of her coat. Her body had begun to fill out in the smallest ways, not enough for strangers to notice, but enough for Dorian to see when she stood in the morning light. Less hollow at the flank, less tremor in the legs. She still woke at metallic sounds, still ate as if permission could be revoked, still watched doors. Healing, Dorian had decided, was not a road. It was a tide pool. Some days it held clear water, some days it reflected only clouds. Near midnight, his phone buzzed. "Nadia?" He answered before the second vibration. "What?" "County server issue," she said. Her voice had no greeting in it. Dorian sat straighter. Juniper lifted her head. "How bad?" "Not catastrophic. That's the official phrase. A water intrusion in the lower server room. Backup systems are running, but several document indexes tied to licensing and animal care contracts are returning errors." Dorian closed his eyes. There it was, the little seam beneath the door. "Sandbar?" "Some related entries are affected." "Of course they are." "Dorian?" "What?" "I'm not saying it's deliberate." "You're not saying it isn't." A pause. Rain ticked against the window like fingernails. "I'm saying I don't like the timing," Nadia said, "and I like it less because 3 adoption records changed status sometime during the outage window." Dorian stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. Juniper rose with him. "Changed how?" "One moved from pending review to completed. One from incomplete to archived. One from disputed to temporary custody. Confirmed." "Juniper?" "I don't know yet. Some fields won't load." The cabin seemed to shrink around him. For 3 years, Dorian had heard versions of this melody. File unavailable, status updated. Record closed. Please allow 30 to 60 business days. The old anger did not flare bright this time. It came cold, deep, like water entering a hull. "They're doing it," he said. "Maybe." "Don't lawyer me." "I am lawyering you because someone has to keep this usable." Nadia's own control thinned for half a second. "Listen to me. If the logs show edits during a power interruption, that is not the same as proof. But it is a thread. Corinne wants anything that anchors the true timeline before those changes." "Corinne called you?" "She replied to the supplemental note. She wants documentation proving what happened before the outage, not what we feel happened after." Dorian looked at the notebook on the table. It sat under the lamp, swollen at the edges, stubborn as driftwood. Juniper stepped close and touched her shoulder to his thigh. He did not remember reaching down, but his fingers found the fur behind her ear, careful of the torn edge. "All right," he said. "What do you need?" "Everything," Nadia said. "But not everything equally. We need the animal control record, Marin's medical photos, your original report timestamps, Harlan's delivery slip, and whatever Evelyn can salvage from those boxes. We need to prove the paper trail existed before the system started rewriting itself." The phrase struck him hard. Rewriting itself. Systems did not rewrite themselves. People did. people in clean offices, people with passwords, people who trusted that after enough rain, nobody could tell water damage from intention. Dorian looked through the cabin window. The harbor lights blurred in the storm, each one a tired star drowning slowly. "I'll be there when the building opens," he said. "Evelyn says the rear entrance may be closed. Then I'll be at whatever door isn't. Bring your notebook." Dorian looked down. Juniper's paw rested on the edge of it. "I will." By morning, the storm had moved north, leaving the Outer Banks soaked and insulted rather than destroyed. The county building's parking lot held ankle-deep water near the rear wing, sandbags slumped against doors. A maintenance man in a yellow jacket pushed a broom through water with the expression of a man negotiating with a swamp. The lower windows were fogged from inside. Officer Lee Carver met Dorian and Nadia under the covered entrance. Her uniform was damp at the shoulders, her cap pulled low, a county radio muttering at her belt. She looked as if she had spent the night driving from one flooded yard to another, persuading frightened animals and unreasonable people to choose survival. "I have the incident statement," she said, holding up a sealed folder. "Not final adjudication, but official preliminary documentation." Nadia took it like a priest receiving a relic. "What does it say?" "It confirms Mr. Steele called the storm response line before removing the dog. Confirms photo submission. Confirms Dr. Hollis's emergency evaluation supports immediate welfare concern." Dorian let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Lee looked at him. "It doesn't solve custody." "I know, but it makes it harder for someone to call you a thief without explaining the condition she was found in." There were sentences that did not sound like mercy until later. Dorian nodded once. "Thank you." Lee shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Thank me if it holds." Inside, the county building smelled worse than before. Wet carpet, electrical dust, old paper waking from nightmares. The lobby lights flickered once, then steadied. A printed sign had been taped near the hallway. Digital record access. Limited. Expect delays. Nadia looked at it. That sign should have a patron saint. Dorian glanced at her. "What?" "Saint Pending," she said. "Protector of every file nobody wants to find." He almost smiled. Evelyn Rusk was already waiting at the records counter, wearing gloves and a cardigan the color of storm clouds. Her silver hair looked sharper than usual, as if the humidity itself had been warned not to interfere. "You are late," she said. Nadia checked her watch. "We are 4 minutes early." "I was speaking spiritually." Dorian set his notebook on the counter. Evelyn eyed it. "Good. The kingdom of chaos brings tribute." "Rear storage?" Nadia asked. "Damp, not drowned." Evelyn picked up a ring of keys. Yet. The supplemental storage room sat in the low rear wing, behind a door that opened with a rubbery protest. The smell met them first. Cardboard, mildew, concrete, and brackish water. Not the honest salt of the harbor, but trapped dampness, the breath of rooms where forgotten things waited to become useless. Dorian switched on his flashlight. The beam cut across metal shelves, plastic bins, file boxes darkened at the bottom edges. A narrow channel of water ran along the far wall. The room seemed less like an archive than a shipwreck that had taken the shape of an office. Evelyn pointed with a gloved hand. "Do not lift from the bottom. Support the sides. If a box tears because one of you performs confidence instead of competence, I will make you regret your skeleton." Nadia blinked. Noted. Dorian moved carefully. The first sandbar box was soft at one corner, but intact. SBK AC 17. Then 18. Then 19. He read the codes aloud. Nadia logged them. Evelyn examined labels. The work settled into a rhythm. Lift, carry, place on plastic sheeting, photograph the label, open, separate dry from damp, Mark damaged pages. Do not rush. For once, Dorian's training did not feel like a ghost from another life. It came back as patience, as hands that knew how to handle fragile things without pretending fragility was weakness. Nadia opened a folder labeled Storm Animal Care Disbursement. Payments, she said, Harbor Valor to Sandbar, small amounts, split categories. Dates? Dorian asked. June 4th, June 18th, July 2nd. Dorian flipped through his notebook, past weather notes, report numbers, Juniper's feeding schedule, a bitter line about hold music, 2 pages of tide times, and 1 sentence that simply read, Pruitt knew my name. His handwriting was not always neat. Some pages leaned hard to the right. Some entries were so compressed they looked like they had been written by a man trying to trap panic before it escaped. He hated that Nadia saw them. She looked anyway, not with pity, with purpose. That one, she said, tapping a page. July 2nd. You wrote Harlan delivery slip? Because he gave it to me after. No, look, you wrote the date from his slip next to the chip transfer date. So? So Harbor Valor paid Sandbar for temporary care the same day the placement summary says the dog was already transferred out. Dorian stared at the page. A useless note had found a hook. Evelyn, listening while sorting damp folders, gave a small approving hum. From her it sounded like applause. They kept going. Not all of Dorian's notes helped. Many did not. A page recording wind shift and a dead flashlight battery led nowhere. 3 names from county calls were misspelled or incomplete. 1 margin contained a single furious phrase about forms designed by people who had never owned rain boots. Nadia crossed none of it out. She simply drew lines between what could stand in court and what belonged to the weather of his mind. At one point, Dorian snapped the notebook shut. Nadia looked up. What? Half of this is junk? Yes. He did not expect agreement. Nadia held his gaze. Half of every investigation is junk. The trick is not being ashamed of the pile. The useful pieces hide inside it. He looked away. For years, his notes had been evidence of damage. Proof, in some people's eyes, that he had become obsessive, suspicious, difficult. Now Nadia spoke of them as a net, not a clean net, a torn one patched with anger and tide tables and unnecessary weather reports, but a net all the same. Something in him unclenched, painfully. Evelyn pulled a folder from SBK AC 21 and froze. Ms. Klein. Nadia stepped over. Evelyn laid the page flat on the plastic sheeting. Adoption acknowledgement, Alvin Mercer. Dorian came closer. There was the dead man's name again, typed cleanly. Beneath it, a signature. Beside that, a date. March 3rd. Evelyn set another paper beside it. Veterinary care invoice from Sandbar, same chip prefix range, same animal description, dated April 17th, 6 weeks after supposed transfer. Nadia's eyes flashed. Juniper was still there? On paper, Evelyn said. She had left. On another paper she had not. Dorian looked at the 2 documents. They did not shout. They did not bleed. They did not confess. They simply sat there, 2 calm lies refusing to share the same room. His anger wanted a target, but the room was full only of wet boxes and old folders. So he wrote, April 17th, invoice contradicts March 3rd transfer. Alvin Mercer deceased before signature, SBK AC 21. Evelyn witness. Photograph taken. His hand shook once. Juniper was not with him in the room, yet he imagined her lying under the table aboard Mercy's wake, chin on his boot, breathing through the edges of dreams. He imagined the metal crate sound, the blue-green nylon strap. The way she had guarded an empty kennel as if emptiness were all anyone had left her. Nadia's phone buzzed. She checked it. Marin sent the full image set. Neck injury? Yes, time stamped from the first exam. She also wrote a supplemental note that the condition suggests prolonged restraint, not brief storm displacement. Lee appeared at the doorway, carrying another folder in a waterproof sleeve. County call log confirmation. Dispatch note from the night you reported. Evelyn looked offended by the dripping sleeve, but accepted the document anyway. Before they could continue, Harlan Voss arrived at the hall outside the storage room, guided by a maintenance worker who seemed relieved to hand him off. Harlan held his wool cap in one hand and a plastic zip bag in the other. His beard was damp. His expression was embarrassed enough to be sincere. "Found this in the net shed after the blow," he said. "Figured I should bring it before I lost my nerve or the roof." Inside the bag was a fuel receipt. The paper had curled from moisture, but the print remained legible. Station name, date, gallons. Vehicle ID handwritten near the bottom. Nadia read it, then looked at the transport form from the Sandbar box. Same vehicle code. For a moment, nobody spoke. The little storage room, with its mildew and dying cardboard, became the center of the world. Harlan cleared his throat. "Is that something?" Nadia's smile was small and sharp. "Mr. Voss, that is very much something." Harlan looked relieved and ill at once. "Wish I'd brought it sooner." Dorian met his eyes. "You brought it." The old man nodded, but did not forgive himself. That was all right. Some debts did not vanish when paid. They only stopped growing. By late afternoon, the storm clouds had thinned outside, but the room remained dim. They had built a timeline across a folding table. Juniper's chip record, Alvin Mercer's obituary, the false adoption acknowledgement, Sandbar's care invoice, Harbor Valor payment categories, Harlan's fuel receipt, Lee's incident report, Marin's medical photos, Dorian's notes. Not a sword, not yet, but a net with weights at the edges. Nadia photographed the assembled documents and sent a secure packet to Special Agent Corinne Vale. Then they waited. Dorian hated waiting. Waiting was where systems grew teeth. He returned to Mercy's wake near sunset, soaked from the knees down, carrying copies in a sealed folder. Juniper met him at the cabin door with more urgency than she had shown the day before. Not joy. Something quieter, steadier. Recognition, perhaps. The beginning of expectation. "You kept the boat?" he asked. Her tail gave one cautious sweep. "Good work." He sat at the table and spread only the safe copies, keeping the originals sealed. Juniper lay beside the notebook, her body curved around it without touching the damp pages. One corner of the blue cover had gotten wet in the storm. The paper inside had held. His phone rang. Nadia. He answered. "Corinne called," she said. Dorian heard something different in her voice. Not excitement. Nadia did not waste energy on that, but the distance had changed. "She says the packet is stronger," Nadia continued. "Still not enough for a broad action, but if we can show an imminent transport using the same vehicle code or related paperwork, she may be able to request an emergency inspection." Dorian looked at Juniper. The dog's eyes were half closed, her breathing even. Beside her, the notebook lay swollen, stained, stubborn. Outside, the harbor reflected the broken clouds in strips of pewter and gold. The storm had not washed the truth away. It had dragged it out of drawers, bent it, smeared it, forced human hands to rescue it one page at a time. Dorian ran his thumb along the notebook's wet edge. For years he had believed paper was what a man used after trust had died. Now he wondered if paper was something else. A small boat, a poor, patched, floating thing, not strong enough to stop the sea, but sometimes strong enough to carry the truth back to shore. Harlan Voss called after sunset. Dorian was at the table inside Mercy's wake, copying 3 dates from his soaked notebook onto clean paper while Juniper slept under the edge of the bunk. Outside, the harbor had gone dark in layers. First the sky, then the water, then the bait shop windows. Only the dock lights remained, trembling in the wind like small, stubborn candles. The phone buzzed against the table. Dorian looked at the screen and answered. "Harlan?" The old man did not waste words. "Box truck just past the net shed?" Dorian's pen stopped. "Where?" "Old ferry spur. No logo. Yellow running lights. Same kind I told you about." Dorian stood slowly, as if sudden movement might make the news less true. "How long ago?" 3 minutes, maybe 4. I was closing up. Heard the engine before I saw it. Road still half cut from the storm, so if they're moving anything, they'll use the ferry dock." Dorian looked down at Juniper. Her eyes were open now. She had heard the change in him before the words could explain it. "Harlan," Dorian said, "don't follow them." "I'm old, not stupid." "There's overlap." "Go to hell," Harlan said, with enough warmth to make it almost affectionate. "I'm calling Nadia too?" "No, I will." "Good, because lawyer women scare me more than box trucks." The line clicked dead. Dorian stood with the phone in his hand. For one breath, the old version of him rose like a ghost from below deck. That man knew how to move without asking permission. That man trusted only distance, darkness, timing, and his own hands. That man could have taken the truck's route, found cover in the marsh grass, watched, followed, and acted before anyone in an office finished saying jurisdiction. That man had survived many things. He had also nearly vanished inside himself. Juniper stood and came to him, stiff from sleep, her torn ear angled forward. Dorian looked at her and thought of metal crates, blue-green nylon, a dead man's signature. A storm pushing water into a room full of paper. He thought of Nadia saying, "If we turn fear into a claim before we can support it, they bury everything else under it." He called Nadia. She answered with the sound of papers shifting in the background. "Tell me it's not a gull emergency?" "Truck at the old ferry spur. Harlan saw it. Same pattern." Nadia went silent for exactly 1 second. Then her voice became all edge. "Do not go alone." "I'm not." "I mean it, Dorian." "I know." Another pause. Softer this time. "Good. I'm calling Corinne." Within 15 minutes, the little world that had grown around Juniper began to move. Nadia called Special Agent Corinne Vale and sent the vehicle description, the previous fuel receipt, the Sandbar transport form, the county payment codes, and Harlan's statement summary. Corinne did not promise thunder. She never did. She asked for exact roads, timing, possible access points, and whether any local officer could confirm suspicious activity near the old ferry dock. Officer Lee Carver was already on shift because storms had a way of making sleep a luxury for public servants and stray animals alike. She agreed to approach from the county road, not to interfere, only to observe and keep the scene from turning into rumor. Marin Hollis arrived at Mercy's wake with a medical kit, a rain jacket, and the expression of a woman who had planned to eat dinner standing over a sink and was now unsurprised fate had objected. "Juniper stays here," Dorian said. Marin looked at the dog, then at him. "That was my first recommendation." Juniper stood between them, listening. Dorian crouched and placed a hand near her chest, not holding her back, only letting her feel he was there. "You don't need to go back near that sound," he said. Juniper stared at him. Outside, wind slipped over the water from the direction of the old ferry spur. It carried the smell of marsh mud, diesel, rain-wet wood. Then came a sound, faint, almost lost beneath the slap of water against the hull. Metal against metal, a hollow clatter far across the dark. Juniper's whole body changed. She did not bark. She did not hide. She rose so sharply that Marin reached for the leash without thinking. Juniper's paws slid once on the cabin floor, then found grip. Her breathing went thin, but her eyes were not empty this time. They were fixed toward the sound, blazing with a terrible recognition. Dorian felt the meaning of it before he could name it. She was afraid, but she was not trying to get away. She was trying to go. "Juniper," he said. The dog pulled once toward the door, then stopped and looked back at him, not pleading, not commanding, asking whether he understood. Marin's voice was low. "Dorian, I don't like putting her near that." "Neither do I." She could regress. "I know." Juniper pulled again, harder this time, then froze when the metal sound came again over the water. Dorian saw the tremor in her legs. He also saw that she did not retreat. A survivor hearing the old room call from across the dark. Not because she belonged to it, because someone else might still be inside. Dorian reached for the soft lead and clipped it to the chest harness Marin had fitted that afternoon. "She stays behind us," he said. Marin did not smile. "Short lead, no heroics." "Talking to me or the dog?" "Yes." They left the boat together. Dorian wore his olive combat shirt beneath a dark rain shell, tactical pants still damp at the cuffs, boots quiet on the dock. His notebook sat sealed in a waterproof pouch against his chest. Nadia had told him once that his notes were not a weapon. Tonight they felt more like a lantern. Marin held Juniper's lead, not tightly enough to trap her, but firmly enough to keep her out of the path of men and machines. Juniper moved low and tense, every step a negotiation with memory. The road to the old ferry spur curved behind the bait shop, past storm-bent grass and puddles that held broken moonlight. Dorian did not hurry. Hurry was noisy. Hurry was selfish. The night did not need another man trying to prove himself. At the edge of the marsh road, Nadia stepped from her car, raincoat buttoned wrong in her haste, satchel slung across her body. Her face was pale in the dock light, but her eyes were alive. "Corinne is 5 minutes out," she said. "Lee has eyes on the road. Harlan saw the truck enter the ferry lot, but didn't follow." "Good." Nadia looked at Juniper. "She came?" "She heard the crates." Nadia's expression changed, not with approval, not with worry alone, but with the sharp tenderness of a person watching evidence breathe. "She is not evidence tonight," Dorian said. "I know. She's not bait." "I know that too." Marin tightened the lead by 1 inch. "Then everyone act like it." They moved closer on foot. The old ferry dock had once served work trucks, fishermen, and emergency crossings when floodwater cut the main road. Now it sat half forgotten behind sawgrass and a leaning sign, its planks dark from rain, its lamps working only when they felt watched. Beyond it, the water opened into black channels winding toward the Sound. Yellow running lights glowed near the loading ramp. A box truck stood with its rear doors open. Inside, stacked in careful rows, metal transport crates caught the light. The sight was quiet, orderly, and somehow worse for both. No chaos, no shouting, no wild scene. Just crates, straps, clipboards, and the steady labor of men who had learned how to make cruelty look like logistics. Tobin Reese stood near the truck, checking forms on his black clipboard. His boots were still too clean, as if mud had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Warden Pruitt moved around the rear bumper, thick shoulders hunched under a dirty yellow raincoat, keys swinging at his belt. Under the small shelter near the ferry office, Graham Sutter held a phone to his ear, expensive black raincoat shining in the low light, his clean outline absurd against the mud. Dorian saw all three and felt the old heat move in his blood. Juniper saw the crates. Her knees bent. Marin dropped with her, one hand steady at the harness. "Breathe, girl. Stay with us." Juniper's breath came fast. Her eyes locked on the truck. A small sound left her throat, not a growl, not a whine, but something deep and broken between the two. Dorian crouched beside her. "They don't get to decide what you are anymore," he whispered. Juniper leaned against him for half a second. Then she stood, not straight, not fearless, but standing. A pair of dark vehicles rolled in with headlights low. Corinne Vale arrived without drama. She stepped out wearing a dark rain jacket, hair tied low, face calm in a way that made the air around her become procedural. 2 federal agents moved with her. Lee's county truck pulled in behind them, lights off until the last moment, then blue and amber flashed once across the wet boards like distant lightning choosing manners. "Federal inspection," Corinne called. The work at the truck stopped. Pruitt turned first. His face went red before he spoke. "This is private property under contract." Corinne held up identification. "We have cause to inspect records and transport conditions related to a federal funding inquiry and documented animal placement irregularities." Tobin stepped forward, clipboard lifted like a shield. "These animals are in lawful transition under temporary custodial authority." Nadia walked into the light beside Corinne. "You used that phrase on the wrong night." Graham lowered his phone slowly, smile assembling itself even in the rain. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. These dogs are being relocated through approved channels. Humanely. This is part of a veteran companion transition program." The words floated out, polished and soft. Behind him, one of the crates rattled. Juniper flinched. Dorian did not move toward Graham. He did not shout at Pruitt. He did not rip the clipboard from Tobin's hands, though some buried old creature in him suggested it with enthusiasm. Instead, he opened the waterproof pouch and removed his notebook. The pages were warped, the corners stained, the cover scarred by salt. A foolish-looking thing, maybe, beside badges, vehicles, official forms. But when he opened it, Nadia moved closer. Corinne watched. Lee stood where she could see both the truck and the men. Marin kept Juniper behind the line of bodies, not hidden, not exposed. Dorian turned to the page marked with a paper tab. "Vehicle code on your transport form," he said, looking at Tobin. "Same as the fuel receipt Harlan Voss found from the night after the first storm. Same as the Sandbar vendor delivery notation in box SBKAC21. Same route, same ferry spur." Tobin's expression did not change. His fingers tightened on the clipboard. Dorian turned another page. "Juniper's chip record says she was transferred on March 3rd to Alvin Mercer. Alvin Mercer died the previous September. Sandbar veterinary care invoice shows a female shepherd mix with the same chip prefix still in their care, April 17th. Graham's smile thinned. "That is a legacy database issue." "Dead man is not a database issue." The words fell heavy into the rain. Corinne glanced at Nadia. Nadia handed over copies. "We also have Harbor Valor disbursements to Sandbar under temporary care categories after the transfer date, plus altered status fields during the county outage." Pruitt barked a laugh. "You people built a fairy tale out of wet paper." Evelyn Rusk was not there, but Dorian could almost hear her. Wet paper remains paper if fools refrain from drowning it. Corinne took Tobin's clipboard. He hesitated. One of the agents stepped closer. Tobin let it go. The inspection unfolded not like a movie, but like a knot being worked loose by cold fingers. Forms compared. Vehicle codes checked. Crate counts matched against transport lists. Microchip numbers scanned. Names read. Dates questioned. Graham's language grew softer as the facts grew harder until his sentences no longer landed anywhere. One crate held a senior female shepherd mix with clouded eyes and a gray muzzle. When the door opened, she did not come out. She pressed herself to the back, body trembling, head low, as if the crate had become larger than the world, and there was no outside left to trust. A handler reached, then stopped when Marin said, "Wait." The dock quieted. Even Pruitt, for once, said nothing. Juniper pulled forward. Marin knelt with her. "Easy." Dorian looked at the old dog in the crate, then at Juniper. He understood suddenly that courage was not always forward motion. Sometimes courage was remembering a door had once closed on you and walking toward it anyway, because another creature still thought the door was the sky. "Let her," he said. Marin kept the lead short and went with her. Juniper approached low, not dominant, not eager. Her torn ear angled sideways. Her own body shook. but she lowered herself to the wet dock boards, belly down, head level with the crate opening. She breathed, slowly, in and out. The old dog stared at her. Juniper did not bark, did not paw, did not perform rescue like a trick taught for applause. She only offered the rhythm she had been borrowing from Dorian for days. Steady, present, no sudden hands, no bright lies. The old dog's nose moved. One paw slid forward to the lip of the crate, then stopped. Juniper stayed. Rain tapped on the metal roof of the ferry shelter. Somewhere in the dark water, a buoy bell sounded once, mournful and holy. The old dog placed her paw on the wet boards. Marin swallowed hard and looked away, as if adjusting her grip on the lead. Dorian looked down at his notebook because if he looked too long at the dog stepping out, something in him might break open in front of everyone. Corinne's agents continued their work. More crates were checked. Veterinary assistance was requested. Lee coordinated temporary shelter with Marin. Nadia documented every exchange. Harlan appeared at the edge of the lot, despite being told not to come, pretending he had simply been walking in the rain like an idiot. "You old, not stupid?" Dorian called. Harlan shrugged. "Tonight I'm both." Pruitt and Graham were not dragged away like villains in a tale meant for children. They were escorted aside for questioning, their phones collected, their explanations recorded. Tobin stood pale under the ferry light, while Corinne compared his forms to the copied records. The darkness behind the operation did not need to be described to be felt. It lived in the mismatched codes, the locked fields, the polite phrases, the dogs blinking under the sudden mercy of open doors. Graham tried once more. "Agent Vale, our donors and veteran families will be distressed by this misunderstanding." Corinne looked at him with amber-brown eyes that held no interest in performance. "Then we will make sure the truth is documented carefully." Dorian heard that and felt, to his own surprise, something almost like gratitude. Not trust, not yet, but a plank laid across water. By the time the truck was secured and the dogs were being evaluated, the rain had softened to mist. The old ferry dock smelled of wet wood, diesel, fear, and the first fragile edge of relief. Dorian sat on a low piling near the ramp. Juniper stood beside him, then slowly folded herself down. Her body was tired in every line. Marin had checked her twice and declared, with the authority of a tired queen, that Juniper was done being brave for the evening. The senior shepherd mix had been wrapped in a blanket nearby. She had not gone far, but she had left the crate. That was enough for one night. Dorian reached down and placed his hand lightly along Juniper's neck, above the place where the old chain mark was fading, but not gone. He did not say, "We won." Winning was too simple a word, too loud, too small. He looked at the wet boards where the old dog's first paw prints still shone under the ferry light. Then he said quietly, "You came back for them." Juniper leaned into his hand. Dorian watched the agents move through the mist, Nadia talking with Corinne, Lee on the radio, Marin kneeling beside another crate. Harlan pretending rainwater was the reason his eyes shone. He had come too, not alone, not this time. He rubbed Juniper's neck with one careful thumb. "So did I." Sandbar Kennels looked smaller with federal tape across the gate. Dorian had expected the place to seem darker after the raid, as if the ground itself would confess what had happened there. But in the pale morning light, the old kennel yard looked tired, more than wicked. The torn tarps sagged, the rusted runs stood empty. The sign that once warned strangers away had been bent sideways by wind and weather, its black letters peeling at the corners. Property for liquidation. No trespassing. Now another notice covered part of it, official and sharp, declaring the site under investigation. The old words still showed around the edges. Dorian stood outside the fence with Juniper beside him. She did not tremble this time. She did not relax either. The dog's body had a way of remembering places even when her mind tried to walk forward. Her ears stayed angled, her amber eyes scanning the yard, the empty stake, the kennel door, the path where Dorian had carried her out, wrapped in his field jacket. The mark around her neck was fading under new fur, but memory did not heal as politely as skin. Dorian did not make her go closer. "Just looking," he said. Juniper leaned against his leg. Beyond the gate, agents moved in and out of the buildings with boxes, evidence bags, scanners, clipboards. Corinne Vale spoke with a county official near the trailer, her face calm and unreadable beneath the brim of a rain-dark cap. Officer Lee Carver stood near a transport van, helping coordinate the movement of the dogs who had been found at the ferry dock and in the remaining holding areas. Dr. Marin Hollis had taken the weakest ones first, turning her small clinic into something between a hospital, a church basement, and a battlefield kitchen. Nobody called it a victory. That word would have been too clean. Victories came with trumpets in stories told by men who never had to sweep afterward. What followed Sandbar was paperwork, medical charts, witness statements, temporary shelter forms, grant reviews, phone calls, and the quiet, practical tenderness of people washing bowls, changing blankets, and learning which dogs could bear a human hand. Harbor Valor Companions closed its white-painted office, pending review. The phrase appeared on a printed sign taped inside the front window. Dorian saw it once when Nadia drove him past the building to sign a statement. The photographs of veterans and dogs still hung inside, visible through the glass. Without the lobby lights, the smiles looked dimmer. Not false, exactly, just trapped. Some of those placements were probably real, Nadia said from the driver's seat. Dorian looked at the dark office. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said. "It's supposed to make the case harder." That was Nadia's version of comfort, truth with the decorative wrapping removed. The investigation widened by inches, not miles. Corinne's office reviewed payment categories, vendor relationships, transport records, locked ownership fields, and status changes made during the county outage. Graham Sutter did not vanish into a dramatic confession. Men like him rarely did. They produced explanations. They used phrases like administrative transition, legacy platform conflict, and donor-protected data. Pruitt blamed subcontractors. Tobin claimed he had acted on supplied documentation, but the papers no longer stood obediently in their separate corners. Evelyn Rusk had made sure of that. Copies from the supplemental storage room were cataloged, scanned, sealed, and cross-referenced with the ferocity of a woman who had decided retirement could wait until the truth had been properly stapled. Harlan Voss gave his statement twice, grumbling the second time that repeating himself under fluorescent lights counted as elder abuse. Lee's report fixed Dorian's first call in the official timeline. Marin's medical records gave Juniper's body a language no database could smooth over, and Nadia, with her red pen and grim coffee, began receiving calls. At first, there were 2, then 4, then enough that she called Dorian one evening and did not open with a joke. "Other veterans are coming forward," she said. Dorian sat at the table inside Mercy's wake. Juniper lay beneath it, one paw resting lightly against his boot. "How many?" "Enough to make me reorganize a drawer." "For you, that sounds biblical." "I am trying not to be dramatic." "That would be new." Nadia ignored him. Some lost contact with dogs after transfers. Some had their names attached to animals they never received. Some had applications marked completed when they were still waiting. Not all of it will connect. Some may be ordinary bureaucratic failure. "Ordinary?" Dorian said. "Yes," Nadia said, and the word carried disgust. "Ordinary can still ruin people." Dorian looked down at Juniper. She had gained weight. Not much, but enough that her ribs no longer drew the eye first. Her black saddle had begun to shine in the sun when she stood on deck. The gold in her legs had returned like grass after floodwater. Her torn ear remained torn. The pale scar of the chain mark remained visible when the fur parted at her neck. Some things did not need to disappear to lose their power. At night, she still woke. The first time it happened after the raid, Dorian thought someone had stepped onto the boat. He came awake with the old terrible speed, heart already running ahead of him. But the cabin was empty. The harbor was quiet except for a loose chain clinking against a piling outside. Juniper stood rigid near the bow, eyes wide, body low. Not at Sandbar, not at the ferry dock. Here. Home, or whatever a floating thing became, when two wounded creatures agreed to sleep in it. Dorian sat on the floor instead of approaching her. "No crate," he said softly. "Just the dock." The chain outside rang again. Juniper's legs shook. Dorian did not tell her she was safe. Safe was too large a word, and animals who had survived bad hands knew when humans overpromised. Instead, he reached up and took the spare mooring chain from the hook near the cabin wall. He opened the door, stepped into the damp night, and wrapped the loose length with cloth so it would not strike the piling. When he came back, the sound had stopped. Juniper watched him. He sat again, back against the bunk. "Better?" She did not answer, being wise. After a long while, she crossed the cabin and lowered herself beside him, not touching at first. Then, with the grave reluctance of a queen granting a treaty, she placed her head on his thigh. Dorian rested his hand near her shoulder, not on the scar, near it. The boat rocked beneath them. Outside, the harbor breathed in the dark. He understood then that healing was not a flag planted after battle. It was this: getting up at midnight to quiet a chain because another heart still believed the sound meant captivity. It was accepting that some mornings would be good, some nights would drag old shadows through new rooms, and none of that meant failure. A week later, Harlan brought over a small metal tag shaped like an anchor. He had made it from a piece of brass scavenged from an old boat fitting. The edges were smooth, the hole drilled clean, and on one side he had stamped, not very evenly, Juniper. On the other side, Mercy's Wake. Dorian held it in his palm. "You make jewelry now?" Harlan scratched his beard. "Don't start telling people. I got a reputation for being useless in more masculine ways." "It's good. It's crooked." "So is she." Juniper, sitting beside Dorian, gave Harlan a long look. Harlan pointed at her. "No offense meant, Admiral." Her tail moved once. Harlan's face changed as if he had been handed a medal and a pardon in the same breath. Dorian clipped the tag beside the plain nameplate on her navy collar. The small anchor caught the light, bright against her rough gold fur. From then on, when Juniper walked across the dock, the tag made a faint sound. Not a chain, not a crate latch, a lighter music, a little harbor bell carrying her name. Dorian kept writing. That did not change. He still copied confirmation numbers, still printed emails, still wrote dates in block letters and checked them twice. He still distrusted systems that asked for patience while swallowing human lives one file at a time. He did not become a man who smiled at online portals or believed every promise wrapped in letterhead. But his notebook changed, not in appearance. The cover remained navy blue, warped by salt. The pages still held tide times, names, notes, weather, suspicion, and the occasional insult aimed at hold music. What changed was the handwriting around his own, Nadia's signature on a legal request, Marin's initials beside a medical addendum, Lee Carver's badge number on the incident report, Evelyn Rusk's precise notation on the recovered storage boxes. Harlan's shaky statement, written slowly because his hands were better with rope than pens. Corinne Vale's case reference number, clean and official, stamped where Dorian could not deny it existed. The truth had stopped looking like one man shouting into the wind. It had become a dock, board by board, name by name. One afternoon, Nadia arrived at the boat with a folder Dorian recognized too well. Not because he had seen that exact one, but because every veteran knew the shape of a folder that wanted something from him. "No," he said before she spoke. Nadia stepped onto the deck. "Good afternoon to you, too." Juniper lifted her head from the bow. The new anchor tag glinted under her chin. "I'm not reopening my benefits claim today." "You're correct." Dorian narrowed his eyes. Nadia held up the folder. "Today we prepare it." "No." "Also incorrect." He took a slow breath. "Nadia." She softened then, but only slightly. If Nadia softened too much, the tides might reverse out of embarrassment. "I know," she said. He looked away toward the harbor. She let the silence sit. That was one thing he had learned to value about her. She did not fill every hard place with words. She waited with the discipline of a person who understood that some doors opened inward, and pushing only held them shut. "I spent 3 years feeding that machine," Dorian said at last. "Service dates, medical notes, corrections, appeals. They lost things I hand-delivered." "I believe you." The sentence was small. It moved through him like weather. Nadia set the folder on the table. "This time, your file goes with a cover letter from me. Copies indexed, certified mail, digital upload, and witness support where relevant." Marin wrote a statement regarding functional support from Juniper. Lee provided context from the animal case. Corinne cannot touch your benefits claim directly, but the case reference helps establish why certain records matter. Evelyn made copies of everything because she apparently considers duplication a moral virtue. She does. And Harlan wrote you a character statement. Dorian blinked. Harlan can write? Barely. It is mostly insults aimed at anyone who doubts you. That sounds admissible. It is heartfelt, if not elegant. Dorian looked down at Juniper. She had risen without him noticing, and now stood beside his chair. She did not lean yet. She waited, the way he had once waited beside her at the clinic, hands on the floor, letting fear decide the distance. "What if they do it again?" he asked. Nadia did not pretend not to understand. "Then we answer again." "We?" "Yes, Dorian. That is generally the point of not being alone." He stared at the folder. For a man who had faced darker rooms and louder dangers, a stack of forms should not have looked like a sea monster from an old map. Yet there it was, jaws made of blank boxes, tentacles of requested documentation, eyes like case numbers. Juniper placed her shoulder against his knee. Not pushing, not asking, only anchoring. Dorian put his hand on the folder. "All right," he said. "Prepare." Nadia nodded once, as if accepting surrender from a hostile nation. 2 days later, they stood outside the post office. It was an ordinary building with sun-faded brick, a flag, and a glass door smudged by 1,000 ordinary errands. People went in carrying packages, birthday cards, returns, bills. Nobody looked as if they were walking a heart into a paper grinder. Dorian stood on the sidewalk with the envelope in both hands. Certified mail, copies enclosed, tracking number already written in his notebook. Nadia stood to his right. Juniper sat at his left, navy collar bright in the sun, anchor tag resting against her chest. "You do not have to trust the building," Nadia said. Dorian glanced at her. "You do not have to trust the website," she continued. "You do not have to trust the phone tree, the scanner, or the person who tells you to wait." "That your motivational speech?" "No, my motivational speech has more profanity." Juniper leaned gently into his leg. Nadia's voice lowered. "You only have to trust that if they lose it, we know what was sent. If they deny it, we know when. If they delay it, we answer. You are not handing them your only copy of the truth." Dorian looked at the envelope. For 3 years he had thought proof was something a man carried alone because nobody else could be trusted not to drop it. Now the proof had copies, witnesses, hands beneath it. He opened the door. Inside, the line moved slowly. Of course it did. A man in front of him argued about postage. A woman mailed a box that seemed to contain either pottery or a very angry spirit. The clerk's printer jammed once, then recovered with a grinding sound that made Juniper's ears flick through the glass door where she waited with Nadia outside. Dorian almost laughed. The gods of paperwork, it seemed, still enjoyed ceremony. When his turn came, he placed the envelope on the counter. "Certified," he said. The clerk weighed it, printed the label, stamped the receipt, and slid the proof of mailing back to him. That was all. No trumpet, no lightning, no voice from heaven announcing that the lost had been found. Just a receipt, a small white strip of paper. Dorian held it as if it were both nothing and a key. When he stepped outside, Juniper stood. Nadia looked at his face but did not ask. He folded the receipt carefully and placed it inside the notebook. Then he wrote the time. The harbor was clear the next morning. Not perfect. The dock still leaned. One piling still needed repair. Harlan's net shed roof had a blue tarp over it that flapped like a badly trained flag. The world, being the world, had not become whole overnight, but the sky over the Outer Banks had washed clean. Dorian knelt on the dock beside Mercy's wake, sanding the wooden name board he had removed from the cabin wall. The old letters were weathered, their paint cracked from sun and salt. Mercy's wake. Juniper lay on the deck above him, muzzle resting on her front paws, watching gulls with solemn distrust. Every time one cried, her torn ear twitched. The anchor tag shone beneath her chin. "You still planning that war?" Dorian asked without looking up. Juniper sighed. "Wise?" He repainted the letters slowly. Not perfect. He was not Evelyn. The Y came out slightly uneven. The W leaned with the personality of a drunk sailor. But when he finished, the name could be read from the dock again. Mercy's wake. What Mercy left behind. Not purity, not instant repair, not a clean story. A path through water where something heavy had passed and not sunk. Inside the cabin, the notebook lay open on the table. The first line on the new page read, "Filed benefits claimed today." Below it, Dorian had written, "Not alone." He had considered adding more. Names, times, receipt number, weather, gull activity, Juniper's breakfast, the absurdity of the postal printer. All of that could come later. For once, 2 lines were enough. He climbed back onto the boat and sat beside Juniper. She lifted her head, then rested it against his thigh. He placed one hand lightly along her neck, above the fading scar. Out beyond the harbor, the sea flashed silver under the sun like an old shield washed clean after a battle no songs would ever fully understand. Dorian was not healed. Juniper was not healed. That was not a tragedy. It was simply honest. Some wounds became weather. Some memories stayed in the body like old hooks. Some systems still lost things. Some people still wrapped harm in kind words and clean paint. The world remained capable of stealing names, files, dogs, years. But it was also capable of this. A stern archivist guarding damp boxes, a tired officer writing the right time in the right place, a veterinarian printing 2 copies because paper mattered to a man who had been erased, an old net mender shaping a tag from scrap brass, a lawyer who did not confuse comfort with surrender, a federal agent who knew truth had to be documented carefully, and a dog who had stepped back toward the sound of crates because others had not yet reached open air. Hope, Dorian thought, was not a bright thing. It was stubborn. It wore scars. It leaned against your knee without asking for a speech. He looked down at Juniper. She looked back, amber eyes calmer than they had been, not free of the past, but no longer owned by it. Dorian rubbed the edge of her torn ear with one careful thumb. "Fair enough?" he asked. Juniper closed her eyes. The tide lifted Mercy's wake gently beneath them, and for a while neither of them needed to write anything down. This story reminds us that truth does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, written on a damp page, carried by tired hands, or reflected in the eyes of a dog who still dares to trust. Dorian and Juniper were not healed in a single day, but they learned that even after loss, delay, and disappointment, no one has to carry the whole burden alone. Grace often looks like one person who listens, one witness who speaks up, one small act of mercy at the right time. May this story remind you to protect what is true, to be gentle with those still healing, and to believe that hope can return in humble ways. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories of loyalty, healing, and brave dogs, consider subscribing to the channel. May peace stay with you wherever you are watching from.